Yeah, this was the one that I wanted to take just because I think it's cool. It's a little bit related to what we were talking about earlier. Um, I think I think this one I'm going to just answer, and I think that'll do it, George, because we've been on this topic a lot, and I think it's a great question for this topic. Uh, but I think after that, it's probably time for me to go home and say hello to my beautiful wife. But it's a very interesting question. So what I see, and it's not the most highly rated question, it's just the top of the stack by coincidence or whatever they use to rank these things. Nevertheless, George A. Freeland, top fan, thank you, George, writes this. What are the best modern or futuristic battle scenes you've ever seen in recent movies? Have any of them captured a good sense of scale in terms of engagement distance and formation spacing? Um, that's a great question. I'm going to assume we're talking about space combat, so we'll just keep it there. Um, I have seen a couple, but I've never seen anything that is even remotely close to what I suspect it's going to look like. Um, I think there are moments, and I've never watched the show because I frankly just can't. I just can't bear it. It's got great effects, and it's just I don't know. It's just something about the cast and the sets and stuff. But the Expanse captures a pretty decent sense of zero G mobility. The idea that you can launch yourself on a vector and then change position and fly sideways, backwards, upside down, whatever the case may be. Um, so the Expanse has some of that. The first movie I remember seeing with that, I want to say The Last Starfighter had some vague sense of Newtonian physics and stuff like that in terms of um, realism. But as it turns out, the reason I wanted to take this question, probably end on this question, is this is something I've given a great deal of thought to. Uh, and I'll just caveat this by saying I'm sure that what I'm about to say is going to be um, is going to look as realistic as the Buck Rogers stuff or Flash Gordon did. The serials with the silver underwear. We just don't know. But in any event, if I had to predict what space combat would look like, here's the one thing I can say uniformly about it, about everything I've ever seen, ever. And that is that the distances are insanely short. And Star Trek, the original Star Trek, was the only show I've ever seen that didn't do that. The original Star Trek was the only show I ever saw where the ship fired weapons at a vessel that was not, within slingshot distance. Uh, they may have to, undoubtedly had to do with the special effects, but you'd see the Enterprise firing its phasers or photon torpedoes, and then you'd see the Klingon ship or the Romulan ship getting hit, but you wouldn't actually see them in the same frame. And then by the time you get to Next Generation, you've got them. You've got these warp-capable, antimatter-driven miracles fighting battles at a half a mile range, and it's just absurd. And what's even worse is that unlike the original series, once we got into computer graphics, or I know, I think Next Generation was using motion control on models, I'm pretty sure. But in any event, once we had the technology, somebody somewhere decided that capital ships, like the Enterprise, would start to behave like fighter jets. In order to make it interesting, they couldn't stay straight and level like they did all throughout the Wrath of Khan battle, which I think is the best science fiction battle I've ever seen in terms of drama. It's not the most realistic, but there are elements of it. If you look at the Wrath of Khan, there's never a point where down isn't down, and where the two vehicles are not behaving like ships. So as you get more and more into the stuff, I saw the Prelude to Axanar, which is the best science fiction fan effort I've ever seen, which looks like it's back on again. If you haven't seen it, it's a It's a magnificent trailer. The reason CBS decided to squash that one and not any of the other fan films from any other franchise is because Prelude to Axanar is precisely what Discovery should have been. It's exactly precisely what it should have been. It's before the original series. It looks like it belongs before the original series. The uniforms look like they belong. The spaceships look like they belong. It's fantastic. But the one thing I really hated about and found almost hard to watch about the Axanar trailer was that these battles between these capital ships, they turned into dogfights. They just turned them into dogfights. It's ridiculous. But think about the engagement range. I mean, seriously, think about it. Imagine a frame from virtually anything you've ever seen where you have two ships in the same frame. You're talking about an engagement range of a mile, maybe? How far are the 5? 2-3 miles? You know? I mean, our Phoenix missile was a 300-mile over-the-horizon missile. And that was to detect airplanes flying nose-on in the atmosphere over the curve of the horizon. You're talking now about 300-400 years in the future, and you've got this big honking flying bank out there, it's the size of an office building, and we're shooting at it, and sometimes we hit it and sometimes we don't. It's just laziness. It's the kind of thing I've talked about before from writers. It's laziness. They don't want to, or they're not capable of doing the work to really think these things out, and so they go with the easy stuff, which makes audience go for it. But if you had the discipline to really think it out and show people something they'd never seen before, which is what I'm going to get to, then I think people would believe it. Because if you showed them something they'd never seen before, the audience would know it was something never seen before, and it would feel real. I've mentioned before how much I loved Crimson Tide, and how 4 minutes into the movie I said, I don't know who the technical advisor on this show was, but whoever it was knew what they were doing. Turns out it was a former commander of the USS Alabama, because the language that they use in Crimson Tide doesn't make any sense at all, unless you happen to be on board a nuclear-powered ballistic missile sub, in which case spin-up tubes 1 through 12 means something. On the 1MC means something. Con sonar means something. And this is the point. This is the real point. You don't have to know. I'm talking about the audience now. The audience, George, doesn't have to know what those things mean. You'll be able to deduce what they mean, but you don't have to know what they mean. In other words, when you see these guys getting all tensed up and getting ready to go, and he says, on the 1MC, this is the captain, spin up tubes 1 through 12. You don't have to know what that means, but it sounds real because it is. And then you believe from the expressions of the actors' faces that this is going to be bad, that undoubtedly this is how you launch a nuclear missile. You don't have to know. But if you say what it really is, people will believe it because it sounds real. And so I maintain that really works. And I've been talking about this for a long time. If Crimson Tide had not been that technologically accurate, nobody would have missed it. But it wouldn't have been nearly as successful, because even though nobody would have missed it, because they wouldn't know that they were missing it, the fact that it was there really took you into the movie and kept you there. My favorite part of that, just in terms of this storytelling, one of my favorite parts of any movie ever, is when they get the message from the, ELF, the extremely long frequency thing, able to reach submarines under the water with a very, very, very long wavelengths. Takes a long time. But when they get the decoded message, and you see these guys doing the thing with the key, and it's in a plastic container, and then they snap this thing in half, and they're holding it above their head as they walk through the control through the combat control center. Holding it above their head, I thought to myself, why the hell are they holding it above their head? And I realized they're holding it above their head because that is the procedure. And the reason it's that procedure is because if you're holding it above your head the whole time, you can't switch it with one in your pocket if you're determined to start a nuclear war through just being a rogue lunatic. And so they would say something and say the message is Alpha Charlie Delta Delta Lima Foxtrot X-ray, and then the guy standing right next to him, the executive officer, would say, I concur. It's 5 letters, 6 letters. Of course you can read it, but you've got 2 guys saying, yes, this is a correct interpretation of the message. This is the message. It says the letters. First officer says, I concur. And then the captain says, the message is authentic. And it's a step by step by step by step procedure that actually builds drama. It doesn't bore people. It builds drama. They don't know exactly what it means, but they know that some kind of a ritual is going on here, and that something very important is going to happen because Gene Hackman, who's usually just, this bundle of energy, is now he's like absolutely tightly controlled. He's like, I concur. The message is authentic. Okay, well, that sucks badly. That means that we have an actual launch order now. So now what do we do? Well, now we spin up tubes 1 through 12 and get ready for launch. It's a textbook example. I think it's the best example I've ever seen of what non-lazy writing can do, and how if you are willing to do the work, it will pay off. Sometimes it's stuff that's just so small that nobody would notice it except for pilots. I remember seeing, I don't know what it was, as Iron Eagle or something like this, some fighter movie where a guy gets cleared to land on runway 72. Cleared to land runway 72. You want to take that one, Foghorn? Still here? Can you tell me why hearing a fighter pilot get a clearance to land at an Air Force base and clear to land on runway 72 is a bit of a problem? Yeah, Exnor gets it. And I'm going to get 50 people getting it. I'm going to give Foghorn another minute or two. He's probably already gone off to start a nuclear war or whatever the hell he does in his free time. Top Gun, yeah, also crap. Well, I know a lot. I know these guys know, and I'm not going to wait. I'll just tell you. The reason you can't land on runway 72 is there is no 72. There is no runway 72. And the reason there's no runway 72 is because a runway number is a function of the heading of the runway. In other words, it's a compass heading. So runway 36 is heading at 360 degrees. If you're landing on runway 36, you are heading due north when you land. If you're landing on runway 09, you're heading directly to the east. If you're landing on runway 18, you're heading 180 degrees at south. If you land on runway 27, you are heading to the west. Runway 32. And so with a circle that has 360 degrees on it, you can have a runway from runway 01 to runway 36, because they're not going to hold digit off. But there is no runway 37 or anything above it. It's just fundamental. But when I hear it, yeah, Exnor says it means you have to fly the pattern twice. That's exactly right. Around one time, land on runway cleared for runway 72. So I'll just take runway 36 then, and then I'll just go around. Is that what we'll do? That's hilarious. So this kind of thing is like, does the average audience member know that? No, they don't. Are they going to sit up in their chair like I did and laugh? No. But likewise, they're not going to be drawn into a story the way they would be if somebody really knew what they were doing. And it sounded real. So it's the kind of thing you don't miss it if it's not there, but if it is there, you get a big benefit. So with all of that preamble, let me tell you a space combat scene that I wrote for the second one of these Aurora movies, not the video game stuff. I was going to call it Ice Station Series, and I may yet do it. You never know. The CG is certainly getting better and all that stuff. But in any event, I had an idea for a battle. Now, I don't know whether I subconsciously took this from a movie that I thought was incredibly impressive when a kid, and then when I saw it again as an adult, I was absolutely convinced they'd remade the movie, because it couldn't possibly be as bad as it was in front of my adult eyes. But it was a movie called Battle Between the Earth, and it was about Battle Beneath the Earth, and it was about the Chinese having these laser tanks, and they were cutting tunnels under the surface to come and invade America. And they'd been working on this for a long time, and they had these really advanced things. And then when the Americans find out that they're coming, they have to slap together something to go out and do the work that this, laser boring tank does. So here's how my space combat scene worked. I had to figure out ranges. I had to figure out realistic encounters based on not having unlimited fuel, having enough fuel to be a combat ship and not having unlimited fuel. I had to figure out which kind of strategy you wanted to use, and I'll leave all of that aside. That's another hour right there. But what I ended up with was a Chinese ship that was really pretty massive. In fact, it had a giant sphere in the middle of it, and guys thought, "Wow, it's a fuel. It's not a giant fuel container. It's a lot of fuel." And it turns out that we don't discover really until the battle. We expect. I'm going to invent a number. I actually had the right number. They're going up to fight this Chinese ship, and based on what they think they can deliver, they're sure it's got energy weapons, laser weapon. So the Americans do a calculation on how powerful that laser could be based on the ability to cool it. And let's just say for the hell of it, it's 3 gigawatts. Well, the 3 gigawatt laser becomes lethal at a certain distance, and the closer you get, the more dangerous it becomes. So that sets a radius on that Chinese ship that is its effective range. In other words, if you get inside this circle, now you're close enough to the laser for the laser to deliver enough energy to start to hurt you. But, see, this is a reversal, and this is interesting storytelling. It turns out that giant sphere in the middle of the Chinese ship wasn't fuel. Well, it could be used as fuel. It was water. And even though it was enormously heavy to move, the water was the only way that they could cool that laser enough to have a really big laser and fire it enough times so that they could actually do it. Because getting rid of heat in space is almost impossible. A vacuum thermos works because vacuum doesn't transmit heat. Air molecules move heat away, or water does a much better job because it's 600 times denser. But so the reversal I had was that we knew the Chinese had a ship, big ship, with a reactor, big crew, heavy, lots of fuel, but not as agile, and we had an estimated range of how much we could take in terms of our defenses and so on. And then I decided, all right, well, what are we going to do with the Americans? Well, the Americans are going to go out and they're going to go with something different. They're going to have a couple of, let me think about this. Let me just think about this. I'm trying to remember something here. Because this was a reversal as well. Yeah. I think what I had was the American ship was going to use a magnetic mass driver and was going to shoot a slug. Piece of steel, that wide and that long. But if you get that thing going fast enough, if you've ever seen the electromagnetic cannons that they've got on the Navy stuff, the railgun has the advantage of delivering an enormous amount of energy. You hit something with a slug that size going as fast as it'll go, and you'll pretty much kill the ship. You'll put a big, big hole in it. Energy weapons, on the other hand, are, if you ever watch them intercept an incoming missile with a laser, they have to keep the laser on that missile for quite a while, like 4 or 5 seconds, something like that. So the American approach is that we're gonna punch hard, but because that slug is even though it's traveling pretty fast, let's just say for the sake of it, it's traveling at Mach 10 or Mach 20, over the engagement ranges that I was talking about, which would be thousands of kilometers, that slowness means that unless you get very close, it's not a question of not being able to hit the ship. You could hit it from halfway across the solar system if everything stayed the way it is. But since they're maneuvering and you've got a mass driver and that slug is moving so slowly relative to the laser, which is moving at the speed of light, that means that the American ship has a very small radius. Chinese ship's got a big radius. The American ship has a small one, and when they get there and find out that thing's a water cooler, it turns out the Chinese radius is even bigger than they thought it would be, and so now we've got the case for some drama. Also, on the side of this thing, we're going to be, what did I have them? Were they fuel tanks or were they solid rocket boosters? I had something, had a number of attachments to the outside of this thing. So this thing's got this rail gun. And so now we've got our fight set up. It's a classic problem in boxing. You've got a big, strong, heavy guy with a knockout punch. That's the Chinese, and long reach. And you've got a much smaller guy with a much shorter reach who can deliver a knockout punch, but he has to get inside. He has to get in underneath the far bigger fighter. He's got to get in there. And if he can do that, he can hit him hard enough to knock him out, but he's got to get in there. So the battle, the actual battle location in my story, was determined 4 or 5 days before the battle. They're on a trajectory. We're on an intercept trajectory. We don't have enough fuel to just go zooming around anywhere we want to. We want to fight. We're looking for a fight. They're looking for a fight too. I think if the other side doesn't want to fight, I don't think you have a space battle. I just don't think it's possible, at least not for the foreseeable future. But in any event, so here comes the Chinese ship on this orbit, here comes the American ship on this orbit, and we know that they're going to cross here, and we have an idea where we want to be. We know what we want that minimum distance to be, and we also know that the Chinese want that distance to be longer, because if it's longer, they can hit us, but we can't hit them. So we're watching these blips converge, and we see this little sphere of engagement ranges, and everybody on the ship, you build tension because now suddenly it's high noon. Now it's okay. Now we got another 2 hours and 14 minutes of life, and after that we're probably not gonna go. So again, to spare you all of the details, they think that they're still outside of the range of this Chinese laser, and this laser hits them, puts a hole right through the hull. And that's when they realize that this isn't a 3 megajoule laser, it's an 8 megajoule laser, and they realize it's being water cooled. But they have defenses. So they stop popping the defenses. And one of the defenses is something that I liked an awful lot from the Traveler days, which was Dungeons and Dragons in space. Traveler had a beam defense, point defense called a sandcaster. And I refined it just very slightly. Basically what it is it's a like imagine an oil drum size can of glitter. Just glitter, and you send it between you and the Chinese ship, and then you pop it, but you don't explode it real big. You just have enough to disperse it just a little bit, so that the laser beam has to come through this reflective cloud of glitter in order to damage your ship. Turns out that those particles are going to absorb enough of the radiation to really significantly lower the damage that can be delivered to your ship. And there's a little bit of armor, but not much because armor's heavy and so on. Yeah, so Astronerd 1 says it's chaff, but it's not chaff because chaff is used to decoy an incoming weapon. This is actually a shield. It's a physical shield to stop incoming laser radiation. So the American ship is just running down the throat of this Japanese ship, and they're trying to do all of these defensive maneuvers, and they're just getting pounded. They're just getting hit and hit and hit, and it's just a question of we got to get in range of this, and we're getting ready to use our mass driver. And the Chinese had a spy in the American team, so they knew it was a mass driver. That's what it was. These two things on the side. These two mass drivers. So it's getting in close to make its mass driver attack, and when it gets close enough, finally, you get a reversal. And what you get while you're still, I don't know, at least several hundred kilometers away, probably more like thousands, if not 10,000s of kilometers away. We're taking these hits, we're putting up the defenses that we can, we're trying to get close enough to launch this mass driver thing, and then when we finally are still out of mass driver range, but inside a certain point, then the captain pulls the big surprise that the crew knew about. And what we discover is that these aren't mass drivers. These are missiles. And we had to get inside the range so that when these missiles come off, they split up into 6 or 7 pieces, and they're all just if you've ever seen Lockheed built something, and it's just, and these things are just randomly firing these control jets, and there's 6 of them inbound to the Chinese target, and one of the other attachments that were on the American ship, which is supposed to be something else, I honestly forget what it was. Turns out that's a solid rocket booster. And the second that the Americans let go of these missiles, they roll the ship 90 degrees and they light their main engines and they light these solid rocket boosters, and they immediately try to deflect their vector to keep them as far away from the Chinese laser as they can. Now, they had to get close enough because if you're farther out, the Chinese have more time to intercept these missiles, shoot them down with their laser. So you got to get close enough. And then you use 6 of them, and they're all dodging and they're all maneuvering. And it's still because the laser's fast, and the Chinese are picking these missiles off one by one. Maybe they get 1 of them or 2 of them. But by the time they get to within a certain range, and we think that based on the speed that they're killing these missiles, that this attack is going to fail, then we get the final reveal, which is that these missiles are not contact missiles. They get within a certain range, and then the warhead explodes, and a shaped charge pushes, I don't know, 200-300 ball bearings, size of M&Ms, and that starts to expand into a cloud. And once 2 or 3 of these missiles pop off, the guys on the American ship look at this, and they know that they've won the battle. And the Chinese know that they've lost the battle because the dispersion of these pellets is such that the ship cannot maneuver out of that. It's a shotgun. So they know that this thing is coming. And sure enough, these hundreds of little metal spheres, like I say, about the size of an M&M, are moving at a tremendous velocity. The missile's given them a lot of velocity, but their closing velocity is enormous. So these things are coming in at thousands and thousands of miles an hour. And so they just plain riddle this Chinese ship. And since, again, it's drama, once these things are inbound and before they hit, the Chinese captain launches 2 missiles that he's got. And these are very, very, very high acceleration missiles. So now we got the situation where we've already killed the Chinese. It hasn't happened yet. It's kind of cool because it's like, you're not going to make it. But we've already shot this weapon that's going to kill them. And now they're trying to get off that kind of like that last torpedo. Now they're trying to get off a weapon that's at least going to kill us as well. And we've got a light ship and we're burning, and these guys are just deep in their couches and they're just pulling 10, 12 Gs, and they're just trying to bend that vector away. And these missiles are coming up and they're trying to bend their vector to intercept. And as these things are closing and closing and closing, you've got literally two phalanx point defense systems, just machine guns. And a cool little part of that would be as they turn and fire, a little rocket has to keep shooting out the back to counteract the force of the recoil. It's just putting out these tracers. And finally, blows up one of these missiles. The other one's coming in and tracking it. And the Chinese missile gets close, and it detonates. And it's a nuclear missile. And it gets very close, and it detonates. And there's no blast effect in space because blast is a wall of air. And so you see just this blinding flash of light. And then as the American ship is rotating, you see that this whole side of the hull has just been blackened by the heat. This thing was close, like, half a mile away, something like that. And the American ship is rotating, looks dead in space, and you see this whole side of the thing is just all charred and black and stuff. And as the thing starts to rotate out, comes around into the daylight, you can see the edge of the burn area and see that there's a little bit of a blade of material there. And as this thing rotates into the sunlight, you see the letters like United States, the U.S. has been burned off, but the rest of the United States and the flag is there, and it's half burned, and it rotates around. And, it took the hit. And good guys win. And I've never seen anything like that before. But that, to me, is not only interesting writing, it's dramatic writing, because there's nothing more drama. Suspense is better. Suspense is the knowledge that something bad is going to happen. That's what suspense is. Any kind of a suspense movie, you look at a classic suspense movie like Psycho, you know that something bad is going to happen. And you know that anybody goes into that motel, something bad's going to happen. And you knew from No Country for Old Men that anytime you saw Anton Chigurh, or whatever his name was, something bad was going to happen. And to me, this entire final battle, which is 20 minutes, is nothing like what you would expect, where these two ships are a mile or two away and they're lasers and shields, which everybody has seen thousands of times before. They're completely bored with it. I think if you show a shot of this American ship just blowing its way out of trying to change this vector, and you see against the starfield, you see a white point of light moving, I think that's cooler than that. Because you can show plenty of close-ups of the Chinese ship, but you say you can't even make the thing out with the naked eye. It's visible, but you can't make any detail. And that's realistic, and it's different, and it's cool, and no one's ever seen any of this stuff before, and it's just fantastic. It's just great. Yeah, spoiler alert. Well, if it turns out that this was a spoiler, then that's a high-class problem for me to have. This is one thing about Star Citizen that's really tough for a lot of us, especially tough for Foghorn, who's a real fighter pilot. You're at the year 2949 or something, and the engagement range is 400 meters maybe. And you're in these turning dog fights. But to be fair to Star Citizen, you're not in a magical turning dog fight. You've got a vehicle that's behaving with Newtonian laws, and you've got a flight control system that makes it behave a bit like an airplane. But that is thrusters doing the work based on inputs you give it. But these missiles in Star Citizen have a range of 5 kilometers. I don't know. I think it's time for somebody to make and I'm not done yet, kids. My motto for Aurora, and then for the second one, and then for the third one, is I had them both really, really well blocked out. And I still remember them, still have them blocked out. But my motto for those science fiction movies was real simple, and it was no magic. No magic. And that makes life tougher. No magic. That means no warp drive. It means no shields. It means no unlimited fuel, unlimited speeds. This world is in 3 dimensions. It's following vectors. You have a limited amount of delta that you can use to change those vectors. And if you use it up now, then you won't have it later. And one of the things that's important about that mission, by the way, that space battle I mentioned, is it's great if you can pull Okay, Fizz, I'll do that. If you can pull enough G's to get yourself out of the engagement range of this Chinese ship and survive the attack of the lasers and the attack of the missiles, that's just grand. But if that means you can't get home and you die in deep space, it's not exactly a win. Dave Big Booty says, no magic, that's why I love Babylon 5. I always hate to disagree, especially with somebody who knows what's going on with this stuff. Hey, how are you? We're good. Thank you very much. Have a good night. Anytime a wormhole opens, that's magic, as far as I'm concerned. So, no magic. Real travel times, real hibernation. Hibernation consisted of a medically induced coma and cooling the body. And I researched the living daylights out of this stuff. So that's that.